Hello young people, my fellow young people. This November you're going to have the chance to make history. Whether you want to change to a voting system that is fair and proportional, or you want to stay with what has gotten us so far, it is important that you vote. We cannot keep waiting. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. It is your chance to make history, to be heard. So vote on the referendum on electoral reform this November and make your voice heard.
Hello, my name is Laurel Collins, and along with my co-host, Dr. Michael Prince, we are hosting Are You Voting for Change with Shaw TV. We have Sonia Furstenau, MLA for the Cowichan Valley, and also the House Leader and Deputy Leader of the BC Greens. Welcome back to the show, Sonia.
So delighted to be here.
Back. Yeah, thanks so much for being on. One of the questions that's been coming up a lot has been around open or closed lists.
Yeah.
Can you describe to our viewers what those are and really address the concern that with closed lists that maybe party insiders might be choosing the representatives as opposed to the electorate?
Yeah, so before I get there, let's talk about how it works right now, which is often when you go to the ballot box on election day, you have one person from each party that you can vote for. And that person has been selected generally by the riding association, so maybe a couple of hundred people have chosen that to be the candidate, but sometimes it can be a couple dozen, or sometimes it can just be the party who decides who that candidate is. And every candidate has to be signed off by the party leader. So there is an enormous amount of party control over who is on our ballots right now under first past the post. So with party lists, what we'd be talking about is the mixed member proportional system, in which case you would have the first part of your ballot would look just like it does today. It would be a first past the post ballot for your local representative. On the second part of the ballot, there would either be, with open lists of names under each party, and you would choose one of those names for your regional MLA. Or if you're just having a closed list, it would be just the parties and you choose one of the parties. All of the parties in the legislature right now have identified that they are wanting to have openness and accountability and transparency. And so there is an appetite for this to be an open list where people can choose. The details would be determined after by the all-party committee. But I think that the concern around this really is not one that should really drive people's anxiety, because we are moving to a more transparent, more accountable system under any three of the proportional systems than we have right now. And I think that it's clear that there is that appetite for transparency from everybody that's involved right now.
Now, given that there is this kind of cross-partisan appetite, why leave the decisions around open or closed lists until after the referendum's already over?
That was determined by the Attorney General's report and recommendations, which came out in the spring. And those were agreed to by Cabinet, and that there would be this all-party committee afterwards. I think that it's one of those things where we get hooked up in the details. What we really want to be focusing on is, are we going to have a more accountable, more transparent system? Are we going to have a system where the majority of votes actually result in the majority of seats in the House? So right now what we have, and the problem we're trying to solve, is that our governments are almost always elected by a minority of voters. We don't have the will of the majority reflected in our system, and we really want to be able to solve that. And proportional systems will solve that fundamental problem that 38% of voters can give 100% of power to one party, and that party is accountable to nobody for those 4 years that they're in. The next election comes in, we go through it again.
Well, you know, since we last spoke with you, which seems like many months ago now,
yes.
and that we've had the campaign now is well and truly on, and people have received ballots at home and are looking at those ballots and the questions, and they're hearing a lot of debate and arguments and issues, and one which I think we actually raised with you when you met with you the first time, but it's still around, and we're still hearing people talk about it, the implications for regional representation.
Yeah.
So there may be that local MLA that's still familiar, if that's one of the choices under the three options, the idea of these regional MLAs, and what does it mean for particularly rural as compared to the urban suburban areas? Now, I know one of the options speaks directly to that, but it's a theme I'm hearing across general debate or discussion about PR is what does it mean for some of the northern or remote or some of the more rural parts of the province? Are they going to lose out on this sort of reform? So I know you've heard this before. And here's a chance to speak to it.
And it's important to speak to it.
Yeah.
So the way that the rules of the referendum were put into place by the Attorney General mean that nobody in BC is going to have less representation than they do right now. So there won't be a shift in the ratio of population to representative.
Okay.
So your representation does not decrease. In fact, for the most part, it's going to increase. And what that means is that you'll have, say, under mixed member proportional, you'll have your local representative just like now,
right.
And you'll also have regional representatives, and they'll generally be from different parties. And the benefit of this is, right now in northern, say, the north central part of BC, which is entirely represented by, in the eastern part, by BC Liberals,
right.
All of the voters who didn't vote BC Liberal don't have a representative up there that they can say, well, that person speaks to my views.
Right.
And yes, of course, as MLAs, we represent everybody in our riding.
Right.
But we still represent a set of views that we were elected on.
Right.
And there is that feeling of being left out. If you're in and it's the same thing for BC Liberals on Vancouver Island. There is one BC Liberal representative on Vancouver Island. So if you live on Vancouver Island and you voted Liberal, you feel like I don't have somebody who's really representing my views on Vancouver Island. And I would like more of that. We would have 30% of MLAs would be BC Liberal on Vancouver Island. And so what proportional systems give us is not just local representation, but also regional representation, but they give us representation of the different views. And so every region in BC would have some representation from the different parties, which means that you're getting those voices from all of the different parts of the province, and people are working together across party lines to best represent you and your region.
About changing our electoral system, and why I think this is so critically important is because of those 12 miserable years in opposition, when there were issues being raised by the people here in Souk and in Juan de Fuca that I would bring to the attention of the government, and they would, there's Rick Casper. Hello, Rick Casper, councillor from Souk is here as well, and former MLA for here. There you go. Why I believe proportional representation is so important is that for 12 years I would show up for work every day on your behalf and tell the government of the day that these were the issues that were important to the people in the community that I represent. And for 12 years they would nod at me and say, I'm glad that guy's gone, as soon as the door slammed.
What do you think, if we were to have that kind of model, the role of the regional MLA? I've had people ask me, well, aren't they in a sense almost, because they aren't the first past the post model, almost a second class or a different kettle of fish really, in that they're not elected the way that we're familiar with, and they're not attached to a specific riding where I may be living and I'm comfortable with that and I'm used to having a local MLA. So the second tier or other level, how does that play out in other countries? And I've had some people ask me about that as well. So I'm interested in your thoughts on.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I, speaking from experience, I mean, once you're in there, you're in there. Your vote, you have one vote per MLA. Your votes are equally weighted. There's no first class or second class MLAs, other than who's in cabinet and who's not in cabinet. But the fact is that, there are a lot of regional issues that cut across riding boundaries. Riding boundaries are, shaped by the Electoral Boundaries Commission after every second election. And those boundaries might not necessarily conform to, for example, watersheds or regional issues. So let's take the Malahat. It starts in Cowichan Valley, that's my riding. It ends in John Horgan's riding, the Premier's riding, right? And so there's an issue that is a regional issue and needs to be worked on across party lines, across regions, across ridings. And so the reality is regional representatives reflect in a lot of ways the realities of the challenges that we're trying to deal with in the legislature. And those challenges don't stick into these demarcated riding boundaries. I often work with MLAs. Doug Routley is the MLA to the north. I work with him on issues. We have a hospital that is going to serve both of our ridings, and that's coming forward. We work together on that. That's how it should be. And I think the regional representatives, the benefit of this is you have somebody who's looking at the bigger picture, and you're working across the lines with them.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking the catchment areas of schools, the catchment area of hospitals, you know, that don't coincide with the electoral boundaries we use, either provincially or federally for that.
And the municipal boundaries, the municipality of North Cowichan, some of it is in my riding, some of it is in Doug Routley's riding, and we both need to work collectively across those jurisdictions as well.
Great.
You've been talking a lot about mixed member proportional. There are 2 other systems. People this week are getting a ballot in the mail, and it'll have 2 questions. The first one, pretty straightforward. Do you want to stick with the system we have now, first past the foot post, or do you want to switch to a more proportional system? The second question, people may be struggling with a little bit more. Do you want to just touch on maybe the complexity or the critique that some of these things might be too much for people, too many details?
So first and foremost, you only need to vote on. You only need to answer the first question for your ballot to be valid, right? So if you only want to answer the first question, just answer the first question. If you want proportionality and you don't want to delve into those 3 systems, then choose proportional. The choice with the second part of the ballot, you can choose 1, you can rank 2 of them, or you can rank all 3 of them. It's not that complicated in terms of filling out the ballot. In terms of the systems, what's really important is that all 3 systems deliver outcomes within pretty narrow parameters. They all deliver local representation. They all deliver a simple system and a simple ballot. They all deliver no huge increase to the size of the legislature, no more than 8 additional MLAs, and they all deliver proportionality. So in the Attorney General's report, this was very clear. So we're working within pretty narrow riverbanks with these 3 systems, right? We have mixed member proportional, we've talked about that. We have rural urban, which is a single transferable vote for urban areas and mixed membered for rural. So you'd have larger urban ridings with multiple representatives. And this is the one that was recommended by the Citizens Assembly for the 2005 and 2009 referendums. And then the dual member, where you, just like today, you would just vote for 1, but there'd be 2 names typically. And the top name would be the one you're voting for your local representative. The second name is what would be used to make the results proportional. I think that it's interesting that there's been a lot of focus on, oh, these systems are too complicated. So 85% of OECD countries use proportional systems, over 90 democracies around the world, and people go and vote in them. As one person said, the Belgians are really smart, but I don't think they're smarter than us. I think we can also understand a proportional system. What's also very important is that what we have in our current system is very confusing, because we think it's democratic, and yet it subverts and undermines and distorts democracy. So it does that at a riding level, because we have more than 2 parties, which means that you don't need the majority of votes to be elected in your riding. You can be elected with as little as 30% of the vote. Right. And then it does it at a provincial level, where those riding level results can typically return all of the power to one party with less than 40% of the vote. And so what we have in Canada is a democracy that is not actually based on the will of the majority. And I think that when we recognize that fundamental problem in our system, which was ultimately built to be a two-party system, we're not in a two-party system. I think that's a good thing when we look at what a two-party system is delivering in the United States right now, this hyper-partisanship, the adversarial nature of politics. I think it's good to have a plurality of voices in our system, but because we have more than 2 parties, the outcomes of the elections are distorted, and it's not purely democratic anymore. And we really do want to solve that problem. Right.
One of the other comments, and I'm glad you say that, about there's also, I think, too, a duty on citizens to inform themselves. It shouldn't be just here's laid out like a cafeteria and easy, straightforward. That there's plenty of websites, plenty of information sites,
lots of videos
for both proponents and the opponents. And we should say Elections BC has also put out information, neutral information, a voters package, and you can go to their website for more information there. But, in the few moments remaining, we've got another topic really speaks to, and again, this is perhaps one coming more from the opponents, is the implications that this may lead to minority governments, instability, and therefore economic uncertainty, and it's perhaps not good for the economy, that the wealth and prosperity we enjoy in our province is in some way tied to our first past the post system, with whether it's real or false majorities, but somehow that's been one of the benefits of it. And so a dire prediction by some saying that we may be going into uncertain political waters and therefore risking economic prosperity for our economy. So again, this is not new to you. You've heard this one before, but for the benefit of our viewers, just in a nutshell, what's the reply back to that?
I'm so bad at nutshells. But two things. One, research and evidence. So I studied history, and so you look to research and evidence. Research and evidence shows that proportional governments, on the whole, have lower debts, more stable economies, and lower corporate taxes, interestingly enough. And that they deliver more stable governance, because what you don't have as much as, and what we're seeing a lot of in our government right now, across Canada, is these policy lurches. So a very small number, a very small percentage of a change in vote can move us from having, say, a Liberal government in Ontario to having a Conservative government in Ontario. And literally it can be a few percent. And then what that means is, and we're seeing it play out, is that the Conservative government comes in and systematically undoes a whole bunch of the policies and legislation that had been put in by the previous government. What does that create? Economic uncertainty, huge costs to the people of Ontario, who are now on the hook for paying these contracts that have been cancelled, for the impacts of investors looking at Ontario now and saying, I'm not sure I want to really go there, because I see it didn't work out for the last investors very well. With minority governments and under proportional systems, because you have to find the common ground and you work from that place of shared values and you work from that place of consensus building, over time it is actually a more stable outcome, both for the society and the economy. And again, that is backed up by research. So.
Well, we're almost out of time, Laurel.
Oh, that went so quickly.
Even with some nutshells.
Yeah, do you want to just maybe wrap up by your kind of little elevator pitch for viewers around this upcoming election?
Number one, I am even more excited than I was last time I was here. I mean, this is, people across Canada are watching right now. People around the world are watching right now. We have this opportunity to say, it's time for us to do politics differently. It's time for us to strive for more negotiation, more consensus building, more shared values, and a truly fair and proportional system. And we will be able to face the challenges that we face and to be able to build a future that we want to build in a more effective way if we can have a politics that actually encourages us to work together and to find those shared values and that common ground.
Well, thank you very much, Sonia. We could talk more, but I'm afraid we've run out of time on this segment of our show. Are you voting for change? And as you're watching this show, you've probably received your ballot. You've gotten your voter's guide from Elections BC, and we encourage you to look at it and engage in this very important historic time. Thank you for watching. On behalf of my co-host Laurel Collins, our guest Sonia Furstenau, I'm Michael Prince. Thank you and goodbye. Hello and welcome to Voting for Change, the show in which we discuss BC's electoral referendum this fall. The theme of this program this month is why vote for proportional representation? We've had a number of guests who you've had the pleasure of watching. Hopefully by now you have received your ballot in the mail, and also a voter's guide to the electoral referendum produced by Elections BC, the nonpartisan office of the legislature of the province. The guide has information about how to vote in the referendum, and it also provides neutral information on the 3 PR options that are being presented to the public on this referendum. The referendum, as you probably know, is being held by mail, and it's available through to the end of November. If you have not already received a voting package in the mail from Elections BC, you can contact the office at elections.bc.ca or telephone them at 1-800-661-8683. The deadline to request a voting package is November the 23rd. Elections BC must receive your ballot by the end of Friday, November the 30th. You can also return your voting package in person to either any Service BC Centre or to a referendum service office, and you can determine the location of the nearest office to you by going online to the Elections BC website. The ballot has 2 questions. The first question asks, which system should BC use for provincial elections? The current first-past-the-post system or some form of proportional representation voting system? The second question asks voters to rank 3 proportional representation options that are presented on the ballot, and you're asked to order them in preference. It's worth pointing out that you actually do not have to rank all 3 or vote for all 3 options. You can rank just 1, 2, or 3 if you'd like. And in fact, you don't even have to answer the second question. You can just ask the first question. Another important point to recognize is that all 3 of the proposed PR systems retain some principal elements of our current system, the first-past-the-post system. In other words, our current electoral system is not being totally replaced or scrapped or thrown out, as you may have heard by some. All 3 options guarantee some form of local representation and a continued role for an MLA in your own community. The referendum offers an opportunity to consider whether to add some degree of proportionality to our current system, some sense of greater fairness to the voting system that we currently use, adding new rules on how we vote, how our votes are cast, and how our MLAs are selected. So thank you for watching our shows over the last many months and this one. Please get involved. I'd urge you to vote, and thank you for watching Voting for Change.